Yes, so we have all our town hall speakers lined up already. So I'm very pleased to introduce the Town Hall CVTA Coalition, moderated by Karen Strauss, National Disability Advocate and Historian. And she will introduce all. Hold on, no captioning? Okay, then we just wait 1 moment, the connection. Welcome back again, and good afternoon. We are here for the Town Hall CVTA Coalition, moderated by Karen Strauss, National Disability Advocate and Historian.
We're still waiting for the
Excuse me,
captions.
we don't have captions on the monitors yet?
There are,
at the bottom of the stage.
Okay, we have only captioning on the, okay, we need the captioning for the
monitors on the
monitor.
floor?
Please, yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you very much. So let me say one more time. So we are here for the Town Hall CVTA Coalition. And the session moderator is Karen Strauss, National Disability Advocate and Historian. Thank you. The floor is yours, Karen.
Thank you. So as Francesca said, this is a CVTA session. If you want to hear about that, stay here and invite your friends. We are going to start with a video from Senator Markey, and many of you know that Senator Markey has been a champion of every piece of federal communications accessibility legislation since around the 1970s. So if we could turn that on, that would be great.
The ADA was a momentous achievement, but new technologies have brought new challenges for the disability community, and we have to move with the times. 13 years ago, I fought alongside so many of you to pass my 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, the CVAA, to expand access to communication services and televised video programming for people with disabilities, so that deaf and blind individuals could have access to this technology. And we passed it. And while today we rightfully celebrate the success of the CVAA, I know we have more work to do. Because over the past 13 years, streaming platforms have exploded in popularity. Video conferencing tools have become integral to the virtual workplace, and new social media sites launch every single day. But one thing has not changed, and that is our obligation to ensure that everyone has access to the services and technologies that they need to thrive in our society. And that is why I'm reintroducing my Communications, Video, and Technology Accessibility Act, the CVTA, to close the technology accessibility gaps in our online ecosystem. Specifically, my bill is going to strengthen standards for television programming and emergency communication. That's a must. I'm also going to work to expand accessibility requirements to online platforms. That's the present and the future. And we also have to equip the federal government with the ability to improve accessibility of emerging technologies. The CVTA will ensure that accessibility is never an afterthought. Not now, and not in the future. And I look forward to fighting alongside all of you to pass the CVTA and secure opportunity, independence, inclusion, and access for everyone in our society. We have to unlock the human potential of everyone so that they're full participants in our democracy and in our economy. And I'm looking forward to partnering with you to get those victories and to secure them for the future of our country.
Okay, what better start can we have than that? Well, I could think of something. He talked about moving with the times. Would all of you stand up in either body or spirit? And I'm going to pass it over to some very powerful women who are going to, wait a second, you're not standing up. Up. We need help on this one, all right? Go for it. Are you ready?
The YMCA song? Okay, we're gonna do it in real life, but unfortunately, I'm gonna need all of my panelists to sing here. Ready? We're gonna do the CVTA.
CVTA, okay. We know you're tired after lunch, so this is your wake-up call for the CVTA.
On
1, 2, 3. CVTA. CVTA. Okay, do we know any more?
One more.
CVTA. Okay, we don't know the
Yeah,
words.
we're good.
That's it.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay. All right. Now that you're all awake, all right. Thank you for being here. Marky mentioned that the bill was reintroduced. It had originally been introduced in November. And all of you know that we are in a very different time than we were before the CVAA, the CVTA's predecessor. We now have greater awareness, we have greater inclusion, we have greater participation, and we have greater accessibility. But we still have gaps, and we still have the future. And as you heard from Jenny LaFleury, everything keeps changing, literally minute by minute. So this bill is designed to make sure that as we go forward, we're going to keep up with those emerging technologies. We have a panelist of people that are going to share with you an overview of what's in the bill for the first half an hour, and then we're going to spend the whole second half an hour on a town hall. And so please write down your questions. You can send them by Slack. You can raise your hand at the end. But we want to hear from you. We want to know your questions. We want to know your comments. Let me introduce the panelists. We have Anne-Marie Killian from TDI for Access. Raise your hand, Anne-Marie. And we have Howard Rosenblum from the National Association of the Deaf, Clark Rafschel from American Council of the Blind, Lisa Hamlin from Hearing Loss Association of America, Larry Goldberg, who is an accessibility media and technology consultant, and Daniela Decker, who is our town hall moderator and also a consultant. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Peltz-Strauss. I've been around for a few years. Come and see me if you want to hear more. Let me just give you a really, really quick overview, and then I'm going to pass it along because we have a lot to cover. Anne-Marie is going to go over video programming, video programming sections. Clark is going to do the audio description sections. Larry is going to cover accessibility to video devices, video programming devices, that is. I'll give you a quick overview of the telecommunications relay service section. We're going to kick it back to Clark for the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program. Lisa will do advisory committees and FCC reporting. And Howard's going to do American Sign Language matters and also video conferencing. And Lisa's also going to do real-time text. So I think that that's it. Did I miss anything? Okay, no. All right. What?
And after the questions.
And after that we'll be doing questions and answers. So we have a lot to cover, but we're going to do it all in abbreviated form. So I'm going to kick it over now to Anne-Marie.
I'm going to sign. So first of all, hello, I am Anne-Marie Killian. And wow, it's beautiful. I'm going to do an image description of myself. I'm tall, I'm height challenged. I'm 5'9", and I have long brown hair, glasses, and I have earrings, and I have a blue jacket, and black pants, and I'm thrilled to be here. The goal of this session is the parody about closed caption and equality access for closed caption and audio descriptions. It's really important accessibility features today, the video programming. The CVAA itself requires only closed captioning programs that have a role for broadcast protocol. So the CVTA is only available in the broadcast program if it's available on TV. The CVTA removed that limitation, which is really important for us to acknowledge the impact since COVID, and it impacted us, and we relied on the streaming for the news and information and communication, and accessibility was so important. So Clark will expand some more on the audio descriptions and the protocol for those as well, but in the priority information there. So closed caption in ADA and CVTA, they follow the closed caption protocols, yes, including English and Spanish captions. And they have an exemption, the economic burden, that both the groups have and individually as well. The user generation captions as well. And most are not excused from that exemption. So they are making the content, and they have to, the businesses and all of those who are accruing above that, about $1 million, they have to include the captions. In addition to that, we require all user-generated video platforms that don't have availability to make it easily usable for the audio descriptions and captionings for people to be able to upload the streaming and watch our videos, and makes the accessibility easier for the user experience and makes it friendly. And it required the closed captions now to update your current practices and your protocols from 4 years past the CVTA, past that. So they're going to keep auditing every 4 years, and that's so important. In addition to that, why is technology that we're seeing is changing and elevating? And what happened today will change tomorrow. So it's so important for the FCC to keep up with the technology innovations and changes. It also requires the commission to look back to 1960s and 1970s. And at that time, they were excused for the TV captioning. It was only so that it was important for the captions, for example, to be exemption to allow the new internet setup. They typically are waived for 4 years on hold, requiring, getting the captions. So now they're requiring all new innovations to have availability for the captions. So that's a brief synopsis of captions and audio descriptions. So I'll turn it over to Howard from NAD.
Thank you so much, Maya.
Or is it Clark? Sorry, Clark.
What's it, Clark?
Yep, I don't. Can folks hear me? There we go. I just gotta look down a little bit. All right, so I am Clark Rockfall with the American Council of the Blind. Before I get started, I am honor-bound to tell you how excited I am to share the stage with my colleague and Bears friend, Howard Rosenblum, after a very unfortunate Thursday night football game. And, Howard is smarter than I am, he's funnier than I am, and he has better hair than I have. So, sorry.
I do.
Is that good, Howard? Are we square now? Okay.
Fair enough.
All
Fair
right.
enough.
So, audio description. The audio description requirements of the CVTA would mean that viewers throughout the country, especially those in smaller broadcast designated market areas, would not have to wait more than 10 years for their broadcasters to pass through audio described programming that is already available. The CVTA would also mean that audio described television and IP programming would need to be labeled, searchable, discoverable on video apparatuses, navigation devices, and applications that show programming. It would also require an audible tone to be played before or at the beginning of a program to let viewers know that that program has audio description. Now, if all shows have audio description, this won't be necessary. But currently, especially on linear video programming, consumers may not know when a show starts whether or not audio description will be available and how to take advantage of it. Also, there would be separate separate audio tracks for audio description. And this would allow for Spanish language audiences as well as viewers seeking audio description to have access to their preferred content. And this would, of course, would be if it is achievable. And then finally, the CVTA would require the FCC to create audio description quality standards. And this would be for the proper voicing and delivery, as well as audio encoding of audio described content and programming. And this would need to be done within 3 years. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Larry to discuss video apparatuses.
Thank you, Clark. Anyone here actually watch television anymore? How about video streaming once in a while? You ever struggle with that remote control to figure out how to turn it on, find a channel, turn up the audio? Well, the CVAA actually required an equivalent button, key, or icon so that you can figure out how to turn on captions, audio description, or change your settings. But the law never assigned responsibility. So the CVTA finally will clarify the issue that the equivalent that sighted people and hearing people use to control their devices will be available and consistent across all platforms. Because I, for one, have 6 different devices I can watch video on. Every single one is different and difficult. So finally, the CVTA will require easy access to the caption settings, the audio description, also compatibility with assistive technology devices like sip and puff devices, hearing aids, hands-free control, screen reader compatibility and functionality, because we struggle with figuring out how to use these devices, and they're different on every one of them. Of course, we also need to make sure that all of these devices and platforms pass through the captions and descriptions. In the early days, the HDMI standard didn't pay attention to this issue. Continues to be a problem today, and the FCC would take on this issue under the CVTA. And finally, we need to clarify the responsibility. A lot of companies recognize there's a problem here, but it was never very clear who is in charge of making sure all these things work. So the CVTA is going to make it crystal clear whether you're an app or a provider or a cable network, this is your responsibility across the board. So that's the apparati or apparatuses section. And now Howard's going to talk about ASL.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Howard from NAD, the National Association of the Deaf. So there's been several changes that we have not yet touched on. For example, right now, during COVID, there were many presentations, press conferences, meetings, public service announcements that had interpreters that may not have captions, but they were not always accessible to deaf and hard of hearing individuals. Not all of our deaf community is fluent in English, and they don't rely on the captions, they rely on the interpreters. They need to be able to see the interpreters that are being provided. And for right now, I'm actually presenting here. The camera may have me in frame, but my interpreter that's standing next to me, if I had one, may not be in frame, and you may only see half of their hand. So this would give the FCC the power to ensure that those interpreters are visible and in frame on the camera if they're being provided at that event. That also creates a mandate for the numbers. For example, very often, a deaf individual has more than one phone number. And when somebody says, "May I have your phone number?" I don't know which one to give them. Do I give them my text phone number? Do I give them my office phone number, which has my video phone connected? Those are different phone numbers, and if that individual switches them around and tries to call my cell phone, my text phone number, that goes into a black hole, and I never receive that communication. So again, we want to level the playing field for the deaf and hard of hearing community and provide access. We also want to give more power to 911 access. Make sure that the 911 centers are receiving all of the information that's available. When an individual is using their portable phone or their mobile device, there is the responsibility of the device to provide that location through the PSAP to the 911 operator at that call center. That's not always provided. So that is something else that we're working on, is ensuring that an individual's location is provided to the 911 call centers. We also want to address video conferencing platforms. The FCC has made great strides in this area, but we want to ensure that these are included and mandated and codified. We want to ensure that interpreters are accessible if they're provided. Very often now we're all working remotely. We're having meetings through Zoom or Teams, whatever conference platform is being used. We want to ensure that they are all standardized and that there's no barriers to interpreting and captions being provided. We want to ensure that it's compatible with VRS, IP relay, and all of the other things. Again, through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or whatever conferencing platform you're using. We want to make sure that the access that has been provided is codified and ensure that standards are being met. Now, with that being said, I'll turn it over to Lise Hamlin. Lise?
Hi, I'm Lisa Hamlin, Director of Public Policy at Hearing Loss Association of America. And you've already heard how much CVTA would change. But I'm here to tell you there's more. So we're also looking at real-time text. So in 2016, the FCC had rules to facilitate the transition from TTYs to real-time text over wireless internet protocol technologies. In 2016, they also adopted a further notice of proposed rulemaking. And that would comment on integrating RTT into VoIP, VoIP wireline operations, timeline to sunset requirements for RTT to be backward compatible to TTYs, and real-time text features that would be needed for people with cognitive disabilities and people who are deafblind. So what the bill would do would require the FCC to complete those rules on RTT within 2 years. And now I'm going to take it back to Karen to talk about even more.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about telecommunications relay services. Many of you are familiar with these services. They enable people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, or have a speech disability to communicate with other people by telephone, and now also by video communication. The bill makes several improvements to these services. The first one is that it would authorize the FCC to approve funding for something called direct video calling, in which people who make phone calls to customer service contact centers would be able, if they use American Sign Language, would be able to converse with somebody else in American Sign Language. It's faster than video relay service, for example, and provides a more effective and efficient call. The second thing that it would do, it would be to authorize funding for something called communication facilitators. These are people who would be able to tactily communicate with someone who is deafblind. Today, up until today, most deafblind people who need tactile communication have not been able to benefit from relay services, so it would authorize funding for that as well. The next thing it would do would be to authorize funding for something called certified deaf interpreters or deaf interpreters. And these are individuals who specialize in deaf speech or deaf communication that is for people that have linguistic challenges or they've been language deprived and need extra facilitation to complete their relay calls. The FCC actually has an open rulemaking to authorize certified deaf interpreters. In fact, you mentioned, as was mentioned before, a couple of the things that we put into this piece of legislation are actually pending at the FCC. We may ultimately decide that we don't need them in the legislation, but when we put them in, they were not pending at the FCC. So in that way, we're actually happy about the progress that we've made, even if it's not directly with Congress. The next improvement would be to allow, to include as eligible for telecommunications relay services people who have an auditory processing disorder. It's not technically a hearing loss. Many of you are familiar with the legislator Fetterman, who has an auditory processing disorder. Many times he's talked about his use of captioning, and so those individuals would become eligible. Howard, I think, talked about video conferencing systems. One of the other provisions would make sure that relay services can be integrated into video conferencing systems so that somebody that's using a Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams or other type of video conferencing system can integrate a relay assistant or a communications assistant right into the call, whether it be for captioning or sign language or other purposes. The next change would be to require video conferencing providers, these same systems that I just mentioned, to contribute support for TRS, for relay services. Right now, support comes from telephone companies, VoIP companies, international companies, local and state telephone companies as well. But video conferencing companies aren't contributing, and as they start already after the pandemic, we are still using video conferencing to a great extent, so we think that they should be able to contribute to the support for these services. And last, it directs the FCC, just as you heard a little while ago, the FCC is charged with updating its captioning quality rules every 4 years. This would similarly require an update of the FCC's rules and its mandatory minimum standards to make sure that it keeps current with current technologies. Because right now we're behind, and that happens a lot in disability access, as you know. Video conferencing came about in a very big way during the pandemic, but there was nothing to cover it, no laws to cover it. So what we want is to not have to keep going back. We probably will anyway, but we want this to be self-propelling. We want the FCC to have the authority to not only review what the current state of technology is in the future, but also to be able to write laws to cover those emerging technologies. And a little bit later, Ella is going to lead the town hall, and we're hoping to hear from you on what ways we can move towards a society that does not always have to play catch up, and maybe even incorporate some other things in the bill. But before we get there, I want to pass it back to Clark to talk about the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program changes.
Thank you, Karen. And this is Clark with ACB. So the National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program, NDB, EDP, or ICANN Connect. I'm going to go with ICANN Connect for the rest of this segment. So the ICANN Connect program, as formulated under the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, allows the Federal Communications Commission to allocate up to $10 million. And that is for the necessary equipment and devices to deliver and make telecommunications and internet services accessible to people who are deafblind. That has not changed since 2010, and in this legislation, we would increase that to $20 million and tie it to inflation going forward. Additionally, we're adding to the list of eligible disabilities qualifying folks for service and devices as someone who is deafblind, cortical and cerebral vision impairment, as well as audio processing disorders.
And now to Lisa for the last presentation on the advisory committees created by the CVTA, as well as FCC reporting on emerging technologies.
So the last piece we want to speak about in this synopsis, and it's a real quick synopsis for you all, but we want to talk about advisory committees. So CVTA would mirror the CVAA's multi-stakeholder approach to bring people together to talk about what the issues are that impact CVTA and what would help the FCC and I'd say, not that we would know who's on the committee yet, but the people who are on the committee would provide recommendations on video conferencing, closed captioning, audio description, and the Commission's implementing regulations. It would also require the FCC to work in consultation with the Access Board to deliver periodic reports to the Senate Commerce Committee that accessibility barriers, accessibility barriers, if I can get that out of my mouth, make it happen, and solutions for emerging technologies. So video program technologies such as AI, spatial computing, advanced machine learning, and virtual, extended, and dual reality. And finally, it requires the FCC to issue regulations to address accessibility barriers in evolving technology. So now I'll throw it over to Karen to wrap it up.
Yeah, so I just want to mention something about those advisory committees. As you know, for those of you who were around, there were advisory committees in the CVAA as well, and having been one of the people that helped draft that, we were those of us who were advocates were very cautious about that. We thought it was a delay tactic. It turned out to be the best thing ever. When I went to the FCC, I learned that those advisory committees were packed with expertise and experience in captioning and audio description and emergency access. And the reports that they produced were extraordinary, and we literally took them and put them into the rules. So we added them to this bill because we think that getting the information from people like you who have the expertise on these issues is extremely important in crafting policy. So I'm very proud of us. We made it to our halfway point, and we still have halfway to go. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Ella Decker, and she is going to moderate the town hall portion. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening in and doing our CVTA dance. We might have to close off with that as we finish the session. I might encourage my panelists to get up one more time. But like you heard today, I think we've talked a lot about AI. We're talking a lot about emerging technology. But it's all of you in the room who have blue ocean and white sky to play with now. We'd like to hear from you in the audience. What's going to make the CVTA critical for your communities, critical for the technology that you're accessing? So without further ado, Larry is monitoring the Slack channel. If anybody wants to pop in there or raise your hand, because I think we've got some mics headed out your way. And there's this man in the front. If anybody's got a mic that we can hand him.
Good afternoon. Gary Morin with the National Cancer Institute, National Institutes of Health, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Really excited to hear what I've been hearing this afternoon, specifically for Clark and for Howard. Around questions of quality. You know, we talk about AI and technology, but when it comes down to the human factor, quality of audio description, quality of captioning, quality of interpreters, what can we do? What's in the act, and what can we do to advocate for, really addressing the quality of the writing of the script for audio description, as well as the voicing and the technology of integration, whether it's through certification standards for audio description and for captioning, and interpreters. How do we ensure not just more captioning, but better captioning, that is accurate and inclusive. You're balancing out with speed and staying up to word for word with the speaker. What's built in around the quality of those things, audio description, captioning, and what role can people play in terms of pushing for better and higher standards?
Clark, do you want to go first?
Sure. And this is Clark with it, ACB.
I'll fix what you say, Clark. This is Howard speaking. Clark, go ahead. I'll fix what you say. This is Howard speaking.
Okay,
this is what I have to deal with, okay?
This is Clark with ACV, so great question. There are three key elements for quality audio description. That is the script, it is the narration, and it is the audio mixing. You can have James Earl Jones or Morgan Freeman reading audio description, but if it's coming out of only the left speaker of a stereo set in mono, or if the script is horrendous, it's not going to be a quality experience. I think that there are certainly folks that would like for the highest quality, and certainly ACB is among them, audio description when it comes to the script, the voicing, the quality of the voicing, as well as the audio mixing. This is true in whether it's television, IP delivery, within Section 508 for any sort of trainings or modules used by the federal government, and certainly ACB's audio description project, as well as our Sight and Sound Impaired Committee of deaf-blind advocates. One of the reasons that human-voiced narration for audio description is so important to them is because of the, just learn this word, the prosody and the voice quality and tonality is easier to hear and understand to effectively communicate with audiences who are deaf-blind or have hearing loss. What can all of you do? Heck, keep advocating. Demand better. That's certainly what we're doing at ACB, and that's what we tried to incorporate here in the CVTA as well. That's why we have, within 3 years, a report from the FCC on audio description quality for writing, voicing, audio mixing, and editing.
Howard?
Sure. And again, I don't want to grab the floor. It's not just limited to Clark and myself. If anybody else wants to jump in, please do. But I second what you said. Good job on that. But in response to captioning, technology has a way of getting ahead of people and the standards that we've established. So, we are truly playing catch up. We are. And especially with the CVTA, we already have the authorities granted to the FCC to ensure that the quality of the captions is within their governance. It's within their region, but they have not yet exercised that authority. So there's no metrics to look at the quality. So we've looked at various entities, including Gallaudet, MITRE, and others, and we have implemented standards that include and address accuracy as well as appropriateness. And we have appropriate measures for those words. It's not just based on word count and error rates, but it's the weight and the quality of the words and the quality of the caption and the content itself. For example, let's eat grandma. Without the comma, commas save lives, let's eat grandma, or let's eat grandma. It changes the whole meaning of the sentence. And that's just one example out of many, but that reflects the simplicity of the metrics. It's not just accuracy. It is not just content. And I'll be honest, we're not there yet. We really aren't. But once we have metrics established and we can compare metrics, we can talk about the numbers, then we can combine that. We can then install mandates for these metrics. And that is currently under the FCC's jurisdiction. We want to be able to meet standards, but those standards need to be determined as well. So WCAG does have some language, but again, it's not enough, and it's not sufficient metrics. Does anyone else want to add to this?
So just really quickly, the FCC does have standards in place for accuracy, placement, synchronicity, and timeliness. And those were put into place in 2014 after 10 years of the deaf community and hard of hearing community pleading with the FCC to develop standards. But those standards, they require 100% accuracy and compliance for pre-recorded programming. The even bigger problem is real-time programming. And this law does address that. It does say develop standards, metrics for that, and also for audio description. We're trying to get ahead of the game for audio description, as well as expanding audio description. It's tough because metrics are not easy, but I think we have another question over there. Greg?
Hi, I'm Greg Pollock. Come on. Hi, I'm Greg Pollock. I work for CSD Communication Services for the Deaf. I just wanted to ask a quick question to both of you and just brainstorm, pick your brain a bit. You have mentioned, well, first of all, I full-heartedly agree and support captions. Captions are not just the only solution for deaf and hard of hearing users. And Howard, you hit it right on the head. You hit that nail right on the head when you said, sign language is an integral part of our communication, and that's correct. And the second consideration is, as well, that with 911 and emergency access, that needs to be accessible for deaf and hard of hearing people and individuals. That's a huge issue. I wish, and I know it's a hot topic with the FCC, but I applaud all of you for addressing that. I do have a question in regards to the emergency communication and crisis scenarios where information is being spread to the community and needs to be shared timeliness. So, if there is funding, if there is something in regards to funding, and that is also considered timely information, very often that gets lost or disseminated through various networks. And is there an official hotline, or could we set up some kind of way to communicate that? It's not always built into the various programs and the things out. Will you address that through the CVTA? Is that a solution, or is that being tabled for the next situation? Not only talking about crisis, but just other general communication and access.
Are you simply talking about access by people who use ASL, sign language?
Yes, sign language users.
So the bill actually does address the need for improved emergency access for sign language users in a number of ways, partially through video relay service and partially through direct video communication. In addition, full disclosure, I'm a consultant to Communication Service for the Deaf, and CSD did file a petition with the FCC asking the FCC to develop a pilot program of direct video calling. Again, that's when somebody in a customer call center, contact center, crisis hotline, et cetera, knows American Sign Language, preferably a deaf person who knows sign language, can communicate directly with somebody else who is deaf and uses sign language. Because when you have the interpreter in the middle, interpreters are wonderful, video relay service is wonderful, but in a crisis, especially in a crisis situation, being able to communicate directly is very, very important. So there's a petition pending at the FCC asking the FCC to set up a pilot program of direct video calling for government agencies and crisis centers. And as some of you know, just very recently, 988, the suicide crisis hotline, added American Sign Language. So it's really important. It's a need. It's a requirement or a need, an accessibility need that really has not been addressed in the past, and that's the need for direct sign language. And its time has come with everyone now having access to video communication. So we're working with the FCC to get that done, but if they don't, we've incorporated it as well into the CVTA. Do you want to add, Howard?
I do. And I just wanted to add to what Karen mentioned. Yes, that's correct. And about the 988, we really need to push that hard. That's new. For years, it has been voice access only. And so this is now just starting. And part of the issue is how it's structured. So, for example, FEMA should be involved as well. They have a tendency to put out announcements and to have resources, and then they leave it to the states, and the states are then responsible. When FEMA's involved, yes, they do provide ASL services, but it's really in local crises and disasters, it's up to the states, and that's where that disconnect happens. Right there is where that lack of communication or lack of transfer of information occurs.
And the good news is that FEMA recently announced that it's going to be starting DVC within approximately a year. So we're hoping that other federal agencies follow suit, but we'll be meeting with the FCC very soon, doing demos there, and going to push them into trying to develop this pilot program. So,
I think an important part of that, right, is we saw this in Hawaii just recently. We've seen this with disasters around the world as communication specifically to all communities, deaf, hard of hearing, as well as the blind community. But this piece of legislation is for everyone. We've talked about the numerous types of disabilities that are also included here. So when you're thinking about the CVTA, don't just automatically single out blind or deaf and hard of hearing community. It is for every community that will benefit. And I know Christopher Batno had a question in the back there, if that was you raising your hand, or if anybody else in the crowd got it.
Yes. Yeah. One interesting question I'm going to ask about things like captions and audio description is user-generated content. Take a look at a YouTube, which has a couple hundred hours of content being uploaded all the time. Who owns it? Who's responsible for it? We all know that AI is imperfect, so if there's an expectation of pre-recorded content having to be perfect, who does it? Who pays for it? Same with audio description. AI is imperfect. If the content owner doesn't create the content, who's responsible? How does one realistically and morally and ethically do this right?
Everybody's looking at me. Okay, so these are very tough questions, right? And we, in the CVAA, we were told we cannot cover any user-generated content. We're trying to cover it in the CVTA if the content generates at least $1 million in annual revenue, or if it is on a user-generated platform and that the network or channel or system or service that uses that same platform is otherwise covered by the CVTA. In other words, they have other captioning and audio description obligations. This is a tough one, obviously. We're going to get a lot of pushback for this, but we do think that if the revenue can support the provision of accessibility, it should be required. If it's not, if the revenue isn't that rises to that level, then we're still asking for those entities to be required to provide, what is it called, Larry? The ability to write your own script. In other words, consumer-friendly mechanisms for developing captions and audio descriptions so that entities can add it to it. But it's a tough issue.
Karen?
Yeah.
Just to add that point about authoring.
Authoring tools, thank you, authoring tools.
So some of the platforms enable you to generate and edit captions. Very few enable you to add audio descriptions. The idea would be, if you're either required or want to add those, the platforms that support user-generated content would need to enable that.
Better said than me. Peter, back there.
Do I yell or get a mic?
While the mic is going to Peter, I just want to piggyback on one thing that Ella said. One of the other areas that the Act covers is people with speech disabilities, and there are specific provisions for requiring either the compatibility or integration of newer technologies that involve the ability that use ASR, automatic speech recognition, that specifically enable people with difficult to understand or non-standard speech to be able to interact with video apparatuses and video conferencing systems. And I think you'll hear more about that at a session after this one later on today. Peter.
I'm just curious if, this is Peter Korn with Amazon, the formulation that you made for user-generated content feels like it's very much tailored toward a video platform, YouTube or some other one, where there's clear monetization, but there's a lot of user-generated content where the monetization is much more indirect. Am I posting an unboxing video of a product that I bought to the page of a product which may or may not sell in that amount of money, but the user isn't getting that money, they're just contributing something. So I'm curious if the CVAA is covering or contemplating those sorts of situations as well.
So just briefly, I think that that's a really good point, and these are exactly the type of feedback that we need. But generally, in my experience, something that further defining this and further clarifying the intent is something that I think the FCC would do. I think that as long as we create a broad brush and a framework for them to work with, that would be something that I think that they would take on. However, as Larry mentioned, one of the nice things about the CVTA is it directs the FCC to define who is responsible and when they're responsible. And I think that that would fall under that as well. Other questions? Oh, good. Paul.
Keep them coming. These are good. I hope
Yeah,
you all
they're
can
very good.
poke holes in our boat, and we're having really important meetings this week, both on Capitol Hill and downtown DC, to figure out, how we would get this passed. So please keep your questions floating in your brain and ask them, because this is the perfect forum to do so.
Hi, thanks. Paul Schrader, now with the American Printing House for the Blind. The policy nerd in me is curious how you're dealing with jurisdiction for platforms that have traditionally been a problem where the FCC doesn't have jurisdiction. The real question I have as an entertainment watcher is, Clark, you mentioned expansion of description to other markets, but I missed if you said it about more programming. And particularly, I'm interested in wondering whether we can ever get to a place where we can start undoing the early FCC decision about live program, and particularly the example of sports, which is all but unwatchable on TV if you're a blind person, in terms of actually wanting to follow what's really happening. I know it would be very challenging to do, but I'm wondering if this has ever come up, and I would specifically like to know about what the program, what the decision is. We're getting past the, 75 hours now, et cetera, and broadening it to other kinds of programming, other carriers.
So this is Clark with ACB. So yes, in terms of audio description, the FCC is already moving forward under their existing authority to expand by 10 designated market areas per year until all broadcast designated market areas are covered. And that's why it would take over 10 years to do that for the more than 200 DMAs in the United States. The CVTA is for all video programming to be audio described in closed caption. And Karen, I'll turn to you. There are, in the CVAA, there were some exceptions to that. And I just don't have it offhand right now.
Sure. So the exceptions to the captioning requirements were put into place in around 1997 when the FCC first adopted the captioning rules. And as was mentioned earlier, some of them are very outdated. I mean, as I think Anne-Marie mentioned, there is one that says that new networks don't have to caption for the first 4 years of their existence. I mean, that's ridiculous. And fortunately, no one follows it, to be honest with you. Captioning is so mainstream right now that they don't really even follow that exemption, but it shouldn't be on the books. It was put there because at the time that the law was passed, captioning was still, I don't want to say new, but it wasn't required. So that broad exemption was added. Another one is for advertisements that are shorter than 5 minutes in length. Another one is for music. Another one is for locally produced programming. There's a whole list of them that are very outdated. And frankly, as you know, when you turn on television, just about everything is captioned now. So what we don't want is for similar exemptions to exist for audio description because they're outdated. Having said that, there may be other ones for audio description, and I don't know, because actually, Paul, you just taught me something, because I didn't realize that there was a problem with sports programming, and I think the FCC may not know that either. They may have just assumed that since there's so much audio that it's not an issue. So they have to be educated once this bill gets passed.
So Paul did ask about jurisdiction. Well, it's up to Congress to expand that jurisdiction. That's
Right.
what this law does.
Right.
So where the FCC may not presently have jurisdiction over web originals, for instance, so this bill would expand that. And then in terms of, does audio description cover live sports, for example, or any live programming, that would be up to an FCC rulemaking to determine where there are exceptions, and it would be open for comment from providers, from users, and that's the forum that we'd like to see happen.
And in a different language, right? I know it's not a sport, but the Emmys this year, I don't know if anybody likes Bad Bunny. I think it was the Emmys. But the audio description as well as the captioning said Spanish language. That was it. That's all you got. So I really want to know what Bad Bunny's saying, maybe in Spanish, maybe in English, but all I got was Spanish language. So we also have to think outside of our own community and recognize that this reflects on Latinx communities as well, and even further.
That will never happen again.
I don't think so.
And Paul, some of the challenges here are the limitations of legacy technology, right? So when you're dealing with broadcast infrastructure, you may only have one secondary audio programming channel. So if they're choosing to broadcast Spanish language, which oftentimes they are for sports and live events, there's nowhere for the audio description to go. And that's why, as achievable, we are pushing for there to be audio description and captioning in both English and Spanish language.
Yeah, when DTV came about, we thought there were going to be multiple audio streams. That was the expectation. And we thought that that competition between Spanish and captioning, or rather, I'm sorry, Spanish and audio description would go away, that there would be no more competition, but it just didn't happen. So it's a little frustrating.
And the separate AD channel would be just fantastic for the ability to do your own mix, basically. To provide your own balance, how much audio programming you want to hear, how much description. Right now, the mix is in the hands of the provider or the platform, and quite often it's not very good. It gets drowned out by music and effects. But if you could actually control that separately, it would not be so difficult and would be a remarkable improvement on the user experience.
So,
You bet, I wrote it down.
so is there anybody here that has concerns about the bill? Oh, here's another question right up front. No, right, yeah. Okay. Do you need a mic? I think we need a mic over here. Oh, the interpreter's going. There we go. No, she's interpreting. Okay.
Hi, I'm Raja. I'm from Gallaudet University. So the process and the functional equivalency of audio and captioning, in the past, captioning, was all uppercase. It was very limitation. There was a lot of limitations in regards to grammar and punctuation. Very often there were misunderstandings, there were mistakes, so things have improved quite a bit. We now have lowercase, we can have different grammatical markers, and today there's more functional equivalency. For example, there's emojis, that we use during texting. We have non-speech information that can be included, for phone ringing, environmental noise, emojis to show emotion, sarcasm, and things like that. So those are great because it provides that equivalency and a way and we can revisit that in the future, again, if the captions could include those types of non-grammatical, non-speech based information.
Yeah, I think that comes into the question of what makes for quality captions. Good non-speech information. Speaker ID, it's still not consistent that you get a good speaker identification. So defining quality captions, latency latency, placement, still hasn't really been addressed well. There are some rules under the FCC regs, but examples like that non-speech information, which, by the way, the term was developed by Gallaudet, which I love, and SI, there's no rules governing it. And there should be some freedom, some creativity. If you watch captioning on Stranger Things, you'll be very impressed by the poetic nature of it. Does that define quality or not? It needs to be debated.
If I may. So it's not only limited to TV. There's video conferencing platforms and all of those that we use. So very often they provide what's spoken. They don't provide what's not spoken, what's unspoken during the meeting. Some platforms do have speaker ID, some do not. And they're not always reflecting the person who is signing. So there's a lot of variables that we need to consider. And that gives us additional data, additional information, and more ideas and a creativity that we can have, that we can implement within captions for the future.
So one more question over there, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up. And
Hey.
we'll be around if you have other questions, want to approach us.
Hey everybody, it's Zach Bastian from Verizon. Just a quick question on the kind of political realities behind this. Thank you so much for a great discussion. Really excited to talk about the bill. I'm curious, if you guys have any kind of a window on building a caucus around this bill and trying to move it forward, because obviously the support of Senator Markey is incredible, but trying to launch it forward, I'm just kind of curious what the plan is.
So actually, that is a perfect segue into one of the things that I was going to say, and I think that we were all going to say again. First of all, people have asked us, how on earth can you get a bill passed when you don't really have a Congress? Watch us. Okay, that's what I'm going to say. Every single bill that this community has put forward, starting with the Telecommunications for the Disabled of the Disabled Act of 1982, Hearing and Compatibility Act of 1988, Dakota Circuitry Act of 1990, the Captioning Amendments of 1996, Section 255 of 1996, the CVAA, I think I'm missing some, Title IV, requiring telecommunications relay services, all enacted. Watch us. And now we have to stand you all up once again, and come on, we're gonna use our spirit to get this bill passed. So Ella, go for it.
Well, and one last remark. One, for the people that weren't in the room, mind and body. We're standing for those who want to stand to do the CVTA like the YMCA. But also, please come find us all after, because we're looking to expand our small group and get everybody else involved to really push this legislation forward. So if you're interested, we're all here. All right, on the count of three, we're going to do YMCA with our arms one more time.
With the
oh,
CVTA.
sorry, CVTA. Ready?
All right.
On three. 1, 2, 3. CVTA. CVTA. One more.
Okay,
One
that's
more.
it. Thank you.
CVTA. Thank you.
That was a perfect segue. That was perfect because I was.
We lost the piece. Okay, well, the next session is coming up at 2:45, okay. So, yeah, yes. Thank you so much for a terrific town hall coalition, CVTA. We have just a few minutes break, and then we resume at 2:45 in 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes maximum, for a panel discussion on new frontiers for inclusive speech recognition. Thank you.